Howdy and welcome back. So we're going to continue our discussion about the allocation of objects on the stack. Today's lesson is going to start out with a brief overview of memory allocation. We'll look at where different things get allocated, say named objects on the stack, dynamically allocated objects in the free store, and then global objects on the code static region of memory. We'll then get into a bit more of a discussion about the allocation of memory to variables or named objects on the stack. We'll move into kind of this question as to, well, why do the sizes of objects stored on the stack must be known at compile time? And then we're going to go through an example of problematic, this function that presents some of the limitations of using the stack exclusively within our applications. And then we'll go ahead and discuss those in a bit more detail to close out the lesson. So with that ado, let's go ahead and get started.